Hey everybody, if you have an orange band on your wrist, you can get a drink before we get started. And if you don't have an orange band on your wrist, you can also get a drink before we get started. You just need some cash. It has to be like right in front of your mouth. Okay? Right in front of your mouth. Good evening, everyone. Hello. Hi. Did you close that door? Thank you. Okay, awesome. Hello, my name is Melanie McNair. I am the Senior Director of Public Programming here at the Center for Fiction. It's my absolute joy to welcome the Brooklyn Caribbean Literary Festival back into this room for the 5th year, and we'll just pretend that 2 of those years weren't virtual. But we opened the building here the same year that the Brooklyn Caribbean Literary Festival started. So I consider these 3 ladies who started this festival as coworkers of mine, and I love working with them every year. And I'm so happy to see all of you here. How many of you have been to the Center for Fiction before? A few of you. And if you haven't, then welcome back. Please come back all the time. We've got, we're a membership library, and we have a Caribbean literary collection that we've worked with these ladies to on in our library. So you can check out fiction from all over the Caribbean there too. And what else do I need to tell you? There is a bathroom against this back wall. So at any point, you may get up and go. And the bar, we're currently having trouble with our credit card system, but if you want to buy more drinks, you're welcome to get up and do that at any point. You just need cash. And there are special rum drinks tonight, of course. So please help yourself. And fun is absolutely allowed, even though it looks like a library in here. It's just, yeah, so I'm going to stop talking and welcome one of our founders, Marcia, up here to tell you more about the Caribbean Literary Festival.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. I want to first thank our sponsors who make this calling of ours possible. That's the Hawthorne Dunn Foundation, the Center for Fiction, of course, NYU, Community Revitalization Partnership, Peepaltree Press, and tonight we have libations and really delicious treats, courtesy our partners Sugarcane and 10 to 1 Rum. I also want to thank, and it would be absolutely foolish of me not to thank my partners or my midwives in this venture, Melissa and Melanie. They make this work feel not like work, and I compromise the thing that keeps the lights on in my house every day because of the number of hours that we pour into this. I want to say that none of this, or very little of this, is actually, a lot of this, I should say, is offset by great personal sacrifices. Many of them come out of our own pockets. And that's rare that you find a team of women who live in the most expensive city in the world who are willing to give of themselves every single day, every single minute of the day to do this. And that's because I think that this is no longer work, but this is our calling. And I'm grateful to Melissa and Melanie for entertaining every frenetic text and call and idea, because they do not stop coming. I want to thank our family and our friends for also supporting us. And to Lawyers Alliance, we recently became a 501c3, or we're on that road. And that just means that we get to tell the federal government that we don't want to pay taxes on the donations that are given to us. So it's 5 years, and I can't believe that I am on this platform for a 5th year, crowing about the beauty of Caribbean literature, but here I am. It looks a lot different to what we originally intended, and the more that this work shapes and moves and bends to accommodate the needs of Caribbean writers who live in the diaspora and Caribbean writers who live in the region, the more that work just shapes and bends to meet their needs tells me that we're on the right path and that we have the right texture. We are not yet yoked to political affiliations that make our integrity and our authenticity compromised in any way. And if I can do my part to ensure that we remain on that path, then that's what I'm committed to do. But I want to say that for me, and have had to think about what I'm going to say on the 5th anniversary of the BCLF, I want to say that I've been reflecting very heavily on what it means to be the guardian of a story, right? I am a self-proclaimed story peddler. I do not write, but the thing that has given me confidence to walk through this world are the stories that I've been told and are the histories that I've inherited. And being from Trinidad and Tobago and being from the Caribbean is a gift that keeps on giving. And so when I think about Festival 5 and about being in a place, and Lauren and we had a very interesting conversation about post-memory the other day. When you're living in the diaspora, there's a very interesting relationship with the people who live at home, right? There's this push and pull, and so the BCLF has kind of emerged as this bridge between these two places. But what we really exist always is in this state of post-memory. There's a hankering that comes out in our stories, by the Caribbean American writers in our short story contest. There's a hankering for home, there's a longing, there's memory, there's grief, but there's also a clarity that distance provides. But on the other hand, when we look at the region, that's our source, right? Like that's the mothership, that's what we have to go back to be refreshed, that's what we go back to just to remain authentic. And so we're so privileged, and every day we realize this, to be in the publishing capital of the world, building a bridge for the movement of the stories between the motherland and where we are. And I think that our role, and if I had a role, it would kind of be just to ensure that we have a body of stories that are preserved and that just kind of remain with us if we have to become any kind of formidable force in human civilization. New York City has been built on the backs and sweat and love of Caribbean people, and we deserve to ensure that these stories and our storytellers get the respect that they deserve. So without further ado, I want to just say that this project is one of those things. We have our prize patron, Dr. Elizabeth Nunez. I mean, she is the quintessential Caribbean American writer. We talk about the island of the hyphen, we talk about having dual identities, and I couldn't think of a better person to have alignment with, and she's the patron saint of so much of what we do and the namesake of our two prizes. This event that you're at, which is the first time screening of this project, is meant to catapult Caribbean stories into the ether and into infinity. When books are no longer cool, and for me that will never be true, I hope that this film and our stories live on, and we get to see her beautiful face, and we get to hear her voice and her memory long after all of us are gone. I do want to introduce Melanie. She is the fixer, so website, tech. I don't want to talk to somebody, I don't know what to do, we call on Melanie, and I'm going to call on her just to talk a little bit about the project. Thank you so much. Oh, actually, what I was supposed to do, was actually introduce Dr. Nunez because she's going to talk a little bit about the prize that she is the namesake of, because that's like a really important piece. And while y'all are doing that, like dig in your pocket, transfer money between your accounts, because we have to buy all of these books, right? We're not leaving the center without buying books. They're free drinks, but you have to buy the books. So Dr. Nunez, please come and just like talk a little bit about what we planned. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marsha. Marsha doesn't know what I'm going to do right now, and I hope I'm not going to embarrass her. But I've known these three ladies for quite a while when this was a dream, and I know they fund it for themselves from their own money. And I want to say that sometimes we look at PBS and certain programs and we say, my God, they're only showing shows about this. Well, they're only showing shows about this because they have donors. Because there are people who are interested in seeing that. And when I personally came to that realization, I made a commitment myself that every year I would give X amount of money to literary organizations. And I have kept that up for over 10 years now. And, and we are not talking about breaking anybody's bank, but I hope if you enjoy this evening, you would open your wallets. So I want to say that I am deeply honored that the Brooklyn Caribbean Literary Festival, founded by the inimicable Marsha Messiah and her amazing team of Melanie Painter and Melissa Harper. My dad, my uncle used to talk about me and my four sisters, there are five of us, five sisters, as Amazon women. Well, he didn't meet these three. So there are two books that they established in my name, for which I am deeply indebted. One of them is the BCLF Elizabeth Nunez Caribbean American Writers Award. And the other one is the BCLF Elizabeth Nunez Award for Writers in the Caribbean. And yet, though I am thrilled by this honor, the greatest honor goes to the winners of the awards, whose excellent works have enchanted readers with unforgettable stories told in lyrical prose, in language that acknowledges both the vernacular spoken by the people in our region and the more standard forms of the language. That cannot be my phone. These writers paint images of the flora and fauna of the places we know and love, and their stories give us characters we recognize in all their beauty and with all their flaws. They continue the legacy of our oral tradition of storytelling, extending that tradition to the page and recording our dreams, hopes, fears, sorrows, as well as our great accomplishments. Their stories are our guides that help us cope with adversities as well as point the way to our happiness and achievements. We can be proud of our Nobel laureates, the poet Derek Walcott from St. Lucia, although Trinidad feels they own him too, since he went to high school in Trinidad, and the novelist V.S. Naipaul, and that's like the opposite. He went to school in Trinidad and then he went to England. We can be proud of our Caribbean writers who have been awarded MacArthur Genius Awards for their literary achievements, among them Paul Marshall, Edwidge Danticat, and Junot Diaz. And I am confident that one day the winners of these two awards will take their place among the ranks of these remarkable Caribbean writers. For too long, the literary establishment has not recognized the excellent work of our writers, those who live in the Caribbean and those of Caribbean ancestry in the US and Canada. So it was indeed perceptive of BCLF to create two separate awards, one that includes both writers who were born and who live in the Caribbean and those who reside in the diaspora. At the same time, recognizing that so many of us have immigrated to the US and Canada, BCLF, in its wisdom, has created a separate award category specifically for those who live in the United States and Canada. I'm particularly delighted that the competition is open to unpublished writers. Unfortunately, the publishing industry, with its emphasis on financial profit, that's really bothering me, has too often overlooked some of our talented and cutting-edge writers. BCLF shines a light on these writers, giving them the exposure they rightly deserve to readers who may not otherwise have been familiar with their works. The competition for these awards is stiff. Many, many writers apply, and only one in each category is selected. Since the inauguration of the awards, BCLF has been encouraged by the success of the awardees, some of whom have garnered major literary awards. So I congratulate the winners, but I also urge all writers to continue writing. Our communities depend on you for stories that reflect our many-faceted identities and backgrounds, and give us encouragement and hope for a better world for our peoples. I congratulate BCLF and its organizers, who through these awards have given visibility in the larger literary landscape to Caribbean writers and writers of Caribbean descent. I believe that Melody is going to speak before I announce the awardees. Is that correct? I can do it now? Okay. So, the two awardees have really touched my heart. One of them is Jade Leatham, who is not here, but she is from Dominica. And her novel, Jungle Siren, talks about the Carib population that's in Dominica. And of course, they do not want to be called Caribs, they want to be called their real name, which is the Kalinga people. And I've had the good fortune to have been in Dominica and met those people. And too often, our novels our history begins with the Europeans who have colonized the islands and do not take into account the real beginnings. So I'm very proud of her. And that leads me to be proud of Lorraine because she does the same thing. In her two extraordinary novels, The Book of the Little Axe and Till the Well Runs Dry. Lorraine is an avatar, I guess, in the sense that she pushes that history beyond the European entry into the Caribbean. And as I was saying to her the other day, and I know this, you're not the prize winner here, but as I was saying to her the other day, I read her novel about 5 years ago, and the images there are so clear. It's like painting. She writes like a painter. Our second awardee is from the Bahamas, which is amazing. I guess amazing for me, because I belong to one of the big islands, Jamaica, Trinidad, whatever. And appropriately, he has written a Bulldus roman, a coming-of-age story of a young man named Eyes, who's determined to leave the ignorance for a bigger and better island. And he set sail on a schooner with a Greek merchant named Pericles. Interesting. And what he discovers is more than could have been imagined and more than he can ultimately bear. Very tantalizing. He won the Elizabeth Nunez Award for Writers in the Caribbean. And those are the two awardees. Is he here? Okay, well, they aren't here, but their books are here. Thank you.
I know you guys are anxious to be able to see the film this afternoon, but I'm here to just tell you a little bit. I think I messed it up. There we go. I'm just here to tell you a little bit about the project. So the project is called 5 Minutes with Elizabeth Nunez. And in an increasingly fast-paced world with shortened attention spans, we thought about how to move books to a format that would stand and defy the threat of becoming irrelevant. As an underrepresented demographic, our stories are at risk of staying in obscurity, and the fifth year presented the perfect challenge to capture the essence of these stories from the horse's mouth, starting with the archetypal writer, who happens to be our festival godmother. The hardest part was the selection process, because she has 14 novels and all of them have something to say. We hope this is the beginning of a movement to humanize, digitize, and create touch points between the Caribbean writer and his or her audience, and the future that defies the time-space continuum. Year 5 was the perfect opportunity to play on the increment of 5. 5 years, 5 minutes, and 5 bodies making it happen. I will now introduce our moderator and guest for the evening. Lauren Francis Sharma is the author of The Book of Little Axe, the 2020 ALA Libraries Transform Book Pick, and a finalist for the Hurston Wright Award in Fiction. Her first novel, Till the Well Runs Dry, was awarded the Honor Fiction Prize by the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. Lauren is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania, the University of Michigan Law School, and the MFA program for writers at Warren Wilson College. Lauren is a book reviewer, a MacDowell Fellow. She serves on the board of the Penn Faulkner Foundation and the Assistant Director of Bread Loaf Writers Conference. Dr. Elizabeth Nunez immigrated to the US from Trinidad after completing high school there. Winner of an American Book Award, an Independent Publishers Award, a Penn Josephine Miles Award, a Hurston Wright Legacy Award, and long-listed for the Impact Dublin International Literary Award. She is the author of a memoir, Not for Everyday Use, and 10 novels, including Now Lila Knows, Even in Paradise, Boundaries, and In Between Prospero's Daughter, Grace Discretion, Bruised Hibiscus, Beyond the Limbo Silence, and When Rocks Dance. 4 of her novels were selected as the New York Times Editor's Choice. In 2 of her novels, she talks back to 2 of Shakespeare's plays. Prospero's Daughter, which in its review, the New York Times praises Nunez as a master of pacing and plotting, and Even in Paradise, which Kirkus declares is a dazzling epic triumph. There's so much more to Elizabeth's bio, but I'll stop here, and you can learn more through the film. Enjoy.
We're going to start this film very soon, but I wanted to say thank you to the Brooklyn Caribbean Literature Festival for having us here tonight. I'm very pleased to share the stage with Elizabeth. I'm going to tell you a little story, though, because I met Elizabeth here, actually, in Brooklyn, and we were reading at an event. Do you remember this?
Okay.
And she came up to me, and she said, "So, Trinidad, huh?" And I said, "Yes." And I knew who she was, but I was trying to play it cool. And she said, "You born here or you born in Trinidad?" I said, "Born here." Uh-huh. So we read, and we said goodnight, and then I saw her a few months later at Miami Book Festival. And she'd read my book by then. She comes up to me and she says, "Your book is very, very good. I really enjoyed it, but let me tell you how you could have made it better." So I said, okay, this lady is something. And I leaned in and I listened to what she said, and then I said, "Oh, I think she wants to be my mentor." And so she hasn't been able to get rid of me since. I've called her, I've emailed her, and I'm so pleased that I'm here on stage with you. And I can't wait till you all see these wonderful films. So we're going to start, and then I'll talk to Elizabeth about each book after we see each film.
Let them know that I never saw the film, so this is new for me. To cite Bell Hooks, the African-American scholar and writer who answers a question similarly like that. She says, there is no feminist writer, there is no black writer, there is simply a writer who writes about the experiences of black people. So I would like to think of myself first as a writer. Obviously I'm black, that's a description. But I am a writer, and I write about experiences that I am familiar with. And so I write a lot about the Caribbean. I write about Caribbean Americans. I write about the interaction between Caribbean American immigrants and African Americans. But is there a genre called Caribbean literature or a genre called black literature? I would ask someone to define what that is. A modern woman. My mother was a homemaker. Here I was going out into the world. I was working. I was getting academic degrees. I was married. I was having children. Actually, I only had one son, but I had a stepson. And so I thought I would write about that. And then I found out that basically I didn't know who I was. And I didn't know who I was because I grew up in a colony of Trinidad. until I graduated from high school, Trinidad was a colony. And so my entire education was British, from the British point of view. And along with that came disparagement of Africa, and being made to see Africa as uncivilized, natives running around with grass skirts and that kind of thing. Obviously, I knew I was African, if for no other reason than my whole body was covered with Africa in terms of my dark skin. So how do I find out who I am? So that novel really was a novel for me to, so instead of writing this so-called feminist novel, I found myself writing a novel in trying to unwind who I was. And so Obia plays a big part in that novel. Obia in the sense that it presents a different kind of way of seeing. It's a different kind of spiritualism. And of course, the spiritualism that I had learned was the Western one, the Roman Catholic one. And the kind of thinking I was exposed to was scientific, logical. But then there were a whole bunch of people in Trinidad who didn't have that way of seeing, whose spirituality was not in that direction. So I gave myself an exercise. I wrote a story. And in the story, in writing that story, I began to have respect for what was taken away from me. And that is an appreciation of my African ancestry, an appreciation for my African way of thinking and spiritualism. Once I did that, I was off to the races. I was able to write any novel after that because I had a sense of my identity. The original title, but there was a saying in Trinidad, what right have eggs when rocks are dancing? And I realized that in that novel I had some very strong women. One of the women was modeled after my grandmother. And she had a kind of, a word I these days don't like, but resilience. She had a kind of strength. And the idea was that, I think in that saying was that don't be so fragile, when rocks are dancing, when they're going about their business, don't be one of these persons who could be broken up because they will destroy you. I was fortunate to be mentored by an African-American writer, John Oliver Killins. And I was in her workshop with Terry McMillan and Arthur Flowers. None of us had published. So I guess I was being very influenced by John Killins in terms of his very pro-Black. I wouldn't say pro-African, but pro-Black. And the second thing that happened to me, and you're asking me to remember here, but I'll try. I had a postdoctoral fellowship at Yale, and the topic was ways of seeing. There was another way of seeing. The logical, scientific way where we have the evidence, touchable, tangible evidence to come to a conclusion was not the only way of seeing. And of course I knew that already, but I knew it from a European perspective. Namely, I knew my Greek tragedies. I knew when something went wrong in Thebes, they went to the oracle. They had a prophet who went to the oracle. But I never saw that connection. I never saw that the foundation of Western literature is ancient Greek literature. That is the foundation. And that foundation did not had a kind of spirituality where you went to an Obia man. That's who he was.
Elizabeth has this look like she doesn't
see it before.
like she doesn't even remember saying it.
But I know what I say these things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the most pressing or the part that stays with me the most is this idea of writing this book that like an origin story, this sense of identity searching that you needed to do for this book. And I'm curious what you think the process is for writers and for people in terms of self-discovery. And because that's what it sounds like you were doing with this book, that you were discovering self, community. This book is very sensual. It's very, it feels like when you're reading, it feels like you're at somebody's kitchen table. You're leaning over and you're listening to who's indebted to who's related to who, and it's got that very island feel. So I'm curious what you think about the idea of the process of kind of discovering yourself.
That book was published she's speaking of When Rocks Dance, and it was published in 1986. And I am surprised that in some colleges it is taught. In fact, Clark Atlanta University, a professor there teaches that book, and I say, well, where did you get it? Where did you find it? Because these books get out of print. But to answer your question, Lorraine, it is specific. That novel and the issue that I deal with is specific to people who have experienced colonization. And for those of you who know about it or have relatives who have experienced it, you have to think of this little island, England, and how many of us speak English in the world? This is a little tiny island. And you have to think of the boast that Churchill made that the sun never sets on British soil. Now, how the heck did they do that? They're limited in the number of people on the island. How did they do that? When we got colonized, we did it for them. It's a hard admission to make, but if you follow the logic of it, we did it for them. So it is very specific. As a person who had experienced and lived through the colonial experience, and even those who have not lived through it but are affected by it, don't pretend that you're not psychologically affected by it. Franz Fanon wrote beautifully about that. But just remember, we did it for them. And how do we do it for them? We did it for them because they made us see the world the way they wanted us to see the world. Through their literature, through their history, through their culture. So that when you grow up, you have to figure out, who the heck are you? And actually, I'm teaching a course on Caribbean women writers at Hunter this semester. And I read a quote from my novel, Prospero's Daughter. And let's see how many of you know who said it. They didn't know who said it. The person who said, how can this history of West Indian futility be written? History, achievement is, I'm messing it up, but basically is, nothing has been achieved in the Caribbean. Who said it? Now you have to figure out, that may sound outlandish to us now, but it's natural. It is natural that he would say that.
Naipaul, if you didn't hear
V.S.
me.
Naipaul. It's natural that he would say that because all his education and everything led him to that point, to think that achievement only happens from which is why I admire your work, Lorraine, because you push past that.
Well, I think what's really interesting is about this book is you do talk about Obia. You talk about this spiritualism. And, we're so afraid, we writers of the Caribbean diaspora can be very afraid of Obia, of falling into tropes and stereotypes that people put upon us as Caribbean writers. So I'm very curious what you think about embracing that, or how we sort of deal with the idea that everybody expects this, and yet this is an important part of many of our upbringing, the way that we live on the islands.
Well, what I resent is they're separating that from the history of humanity. In other words, I had the good fortune to have had a pretty much classical education. So I knew my Greek tragedies. And I knew that what they were doing was the same as Obia. I knew that when something went wrong, they jumped up, went up to the hill, and asked the oracle, tell me whether I should do this or I should do that. And there was no difference. It's just that when we started doing it, you decided that it meant something else. But there's something in the human spirit. So what I don't like is the sensationalism of what they call magical realism and all. And that it belongs to just a little group of people. It doesn't belong to a little group of people. It's a human experience. So I always try to make that connection. In my books, I don't like the reader to get away by isolating Obia. I connect it all the time. So, yeah, I embrace it. I mean, I don't want to offend anybody here, but there are people who have another kind of Obia. Yona is doing this. They go to a different source.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next film.
Bruised Hibiscus had a checkered publishing career. That's when I now come to my so-called feminist novel. Of course, I could come to this now because having written When Rocks Dance, I have a clearer sense of my identity. I'm more secure there. And so I'm able to look at what it is that women have to deal with. And so if you know the hibiscus flower, it is very beautiful. The petals are very delicate. However, and I did this as a child growing up in Trinidad, I would rub my fingers between, especially the red ones, and what would happen is my fingers would turn purple. So that's where you get that notion of looking beautiful outside, but if you are rubbed, then you have the bruise, the purple bruise. And I had a lot of women to look at that I grew up with. Women who seemed happy or appeared to be. And I began to see that there was a distinction between women who are physically abused because they wear their bruised hibiscus on their bodies and everybody can notice it. And they have some way of getting help, right? But a lot of women wear their bruises inside because the society expects them to. The society expects them to go ahead. And of course, this is an aside, but this is what the great Toni Morrison wrote in Beloved, when Setha says to Paul D, you mean my husband saw me get raped and you want me to feel sorry for him because he was going crazy? He was throwing butter on his face. She said, I didn't have that choice. I had to get to Ohio because I had a baby waiting for my milk, right? So you don't see the bruises on Setha, but they're clearly inside of her. So I got very interested in these women that I knew. And there was one particular woman that this novel is two women, but one of them in particular, her husband to me was the most awful man. And she had 7 children, so obviously she had to be sleeping with him. They obviously had to have sex. But I said, no, this woman had to be suffering. So I got very interested in women like that. I also knew another woman who was very close to my family. By the time she was 21, she had 11 children for this much older man. Which meant she had to have started very early. And one more time, women were expected to fill those roles of strength to move ahead. Open that novel with something that is historically true. a fact. It's the fact of Boise Singh, and if you are from Trinidad, that name resonates, who was married to a German Jewish woman, Paula Inga, and he murdered her. He was a doctor, and he cut her up in pieces and threw her in the river, and her body flushed up on the beach. And in Trinidad, class sometimes trumps race. So although he was married to a white woman, more adulation was given to him because he was a doctor, so nobody would connect him. And Trinidad being in a colony, they brought Scotland Yard. Scotland Yard took one look at that thing and said, oh my God, she is, a butcher did this, a doctor with a scalpel. So why I started with that, and I used that then to talk about these two women, to their husbands, and what their husbands are relating to that murder. He must have had a reason to do it. This was an honor killing. And what I want to say is that when that book came out, Trinidad had a book party for me. And would you believe that some of the men were still saying that? Why? Because that woman happened to be on a conference in another island. And the idea was that she had a boyfriend. And so that was a matter of honor that she had to be killed. So you asking me about the relationship. So I have Rosa, who I patterned over this friend of my mother's who had these children, was married to this man. But she looked white. She looked white. And so I patterned that after her, where her husband's view was, you better behave yourself, because this is what's going to happen to you. And she bears her bruised hibiscus in silence. The other woman that you said, Zuela, comes from Venezuela. And I happen to have known her. In fact, I brought her here to the States when my child was born. And so she was a nanny for my son until he was a year old. So as horrible as that story is, it is based on what she told me.
I heard a lot of people going Bruised Hibiscus. How many of you have read that book? Yeah. I think that the thing I love about this book is your insistence that it is not about the individual, that we are products of our environment. There is a social realism. There is community here. These two girls are affected by something that they witnessed very early on in their lives, and they are also affected by this crime that then happens later on as well. And we as writers and we as individuals in the States and in Western culture generally are so focused on the self, the self, the self. And there is often a resistance to community, writing about community, talking about community and its effect. So I'm curious, about your process of thinking that through the communal aspects of this, but also how does Trinidad itself show up on the pages that you write about these women?
This was a very difficult novel to write, and I am super glad I wrote it. I can tell you there was a point I was at the McDowell colony when I wrote most of it, and it was in the winter, and I had a little studio out in the woods, and the snow was all the way up to the window. And I hope I know nobody heard me, but I was screaming my way through it. And I was so glad I did. Because although it's fictional, those two women are absolutely based on two women I know. And I know their stories. And I was glad to be able to render their stories. I think this is what I miss in living in America. Exactly what you said, Lauren, is that America praises the individual and the individual accomplishment. but that comes with isolation. And sometimes there's too much intrusion in the Caribbean. Everybody knows your business, everybody is involved, whatever. But you don't have that isolation. And so these women were in both situations. They were affected by what was going on in the society, and they were also isolated. I hope you will read that novel. I know it's taught again in many schools, many colleges, and not that novel, another one. I hope you will. I can tell you personally, I'm glad I wrote it. It's very hard for me to read it again because I know how true it is.
Do you think you would write another novel like that?
I think it's a one and done. I think it's a one and done, meaning that I think so many times we see novels about the abuse of women, and it's tangible abuse. And I haven't seen many novels where the abuse of women is, the word I hate is resilience. I have to tell you, I cannot stand that word. Because that word supposes something you're being resilient about. Some kind of pain. And so when people think they're saying something nice to me and say, oh, you're so resilient, they don't know that I really don't like it. I'm not resilient by choice. I survive. We survive, and we move forward. So when I say it's one and done, I basically haven't seen, except for Toni Morrison's Beloved with Setha. She has so many scenes. Remember when Paul D starts telling her his story? I asked my son to read. I know exactly what page that is on. It's page 68. All of a sudden, Toni Morrison takes you into Setha's mind. And you hear her say, my God, how much are you going to tell me about your suffering? I have heard enough, I have heard enough, I have heard enough. And she's supposed to be the strong person, but Toni Morrison lets you know about her bruised hibiscus. But she's a genius, though. We're talking about a genius writer.
This is what she does. She takes you down many, many novels. You're talking to Elizabeth about one thing, and before you know it, you have 6 novels that you're writing you have to read. Okay, so we're going to move on to Anna in Between.
Anna in Between was published by Akashic Press. You're correct that it is a personal novel to me in that my mother had breast cancer, and that seems to be the trigger that starts the novel. But it almost is not what the novel is about. It is about me coming, at this point, I had been many years living in America. And it's very strange when people turn around to me and say, oh, you're Caribbean American, I get all, defensive. And yet when I go to Trinidad and they say, well, you're more American, I get defensive. So it's kind of, it was a novel in which I was investigating my place as a Caribbean person, a Trinidadian, and American. I was investigating where I was. And what happened is that my mother's mother, my maternal grandmother, died of breast cancer in her 50s, in her early 50s. And then my mother had breast cancer. Now, my mother's breast cancer was terminal in any way that you could describe it. Namely that her cancer had in fact erupted out of her breast and was bleeding. Although that novel is about breast cancer, that novel was me trying to come to terms with the way Caribbean people By then, I'm so immersed in my American culture, so immersed in the idea that if we spill our guts to everyone, especially if you go on TV, as I'm doing right now, actually, spilling your guts to everyone, this is a good thing. This is a healthy thing. And so I couldn't wrap my head around the idea that I would put boundaries around my private self. And it is a way of healing. That could have been why my mother lived so long. Because there was no way, if you presented that way with breast cancer, you were going to die the next day, the next week. So that novel, and in between these two cultures. So yes, the novel does deal with how she dealt with breast cancer. It does deal with that, but mostly it is my investigation, or Anna's investigation, in trying to understand. Because I'll say another thing, when I go out, my sisters basically have remained in the Caribbean. Yeah, I'm the only one here of the sisters, of the 6 girls. So when I go home to Trinidad, and I say home, we would sit on the table and I would tell a story that seems quite, if I told that story to an American audience, they'd listen to me, I'd get a kick on my shin or a pinch on my leg. What did I do wrong? There's a private self and there's a public self. Put the skeletons in the closet, even if you're with your family, this is not something to be discussed. I don't know which one is right. That novel was to investigate it. And of course, I wrote a novel right after that called Boundaries, which makes sense, right? Because it's the boundaries I'm talking about. That hyphen is a bridge that is not secure. It's a bridge that could anytime be collapsed, done away with. It's a vulnerable spot to be in. And so I myself have always resisted it, personally, probably for that same reason. But the power is in the American side. And therefore the power is in this big nation of America. And the power is there where it could snatch that hyphen away. Right? So the reason I don't feel comfortable with the hyphen, though I use it, is that I think I think I'm very Caribbean. And I cannot deny that I am heavily influenced by my by the years I've spent in America and my interaction with Americans. And of course, I now have an American child and 2 American grandchildren. So I don't want the hyphen, I want them to coexist. I just to be equally valid and equally valuable.
I feel that deeply. I don't know about you all, but as someone born here with Caribbean parents, I remember going to Trinidad and being called Yankee, and how much that hurt. You know, like just wanting to feel that attachment and getting that sense of, you're not quite us, you're not quite there. And I feel this very much when I read this book. What I loved about it was this sense that you took us, usually these sort of middle of the road books, these books that bridge both America or the West, so to speak, and the Caribbean, are set in the host country. But you take us back home and you show us these very distinct differences between this woman who has become Americanized and this family that she's left behind. And this crisis occurs, you know, the mother has breast cancer, and she wants to do something very different than what her parents want to do about this situation. And they are butting heads. And we are left to really wonder who is right here, what culture is right. And there's this real push for for Anna to insist that my way, I know because because I live in the States, because I must know better, is the right way. And what I think what I love about this book though too is this writer as curator moment that I realized you were really showing us a very specific time and a very specific place and very specifically how things are done in this particular time and place. And I feel like in this technologically advanced world that we're living in now, we're almost forgetting to remember. We're forgetting to write, we're forgetting to record. And you do such a beautiful job here. And I'm curious what you think our responsibility is, particularly those of us who have this hyphen to record and to remember.
Well, the first thing I'm going to say is my mother lived 15 years after that incident that I'm describing, where she had a week. And she did not die of that. She was 90 when she died, and it wasn't that. And I would connect it to a spiritualism. My mother was a deeply spiritual person. And her Western spirituality was obvious to all of us. But when that bathroom door was closed, there was another kind of spirituality going on there that she didn't see. So, go back to your last question. Oh, I probably get my publisher very frustrated with me because there was something that John Killins used to say, and I said he was my mentor. And he used to say to us that not many of us get an opportunity to write, far less publish. And that when we do, and I fought him like heck on this for a long time, he said, but when we do, we have the responsibility to tell the truth as we see it, right? So many, I'm going to say this is a fact because publishers have their eye on the money, right? And they have their eye on the market. What does the market want? And so the writer now is trying to conform to that. And I've never done that. I've always taken my chances of writing what I believe is the truth and how I see the truth. And it so happened that the other day I was looking through my notes and I saw a quote from Steve Jobs that Walter Isaacson had done. You say I go down the road of my story. Well, Walter Isaacson had done a book on Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs says he disagrees with the idea that you give the people what they want. He says the people don't know what they want. He says, I do it, and the people will follow. Right? What is happening to me in fiction is that publishers are trying to figure out what the people want, and the people don't know what they want. They don't know what they want. So I know people look at my work with a kind of surprise. Sometimes they say, oh my gosh, you're just saying what you want. But that's what you do. And I just hope you are interested. Because to get back on in between, I guess I'm choosing to to talk about these things through fiction, which gives me much more leeway. But there are a lot of us who have immigrated, and we are stuck in this place. We go back to our country, and my mother would say to me, in one scene I have, which, good God, I'll take you to the North Coast. I'll show you how beautiful it is. Well, it's my North Coast. I know what it's like. But she's now treating me as an American. And that just cuts you down. Then you come here, and you are, well, what are you? Where do you belong? So that's an in-between with the hyphen.
you said in the film you didn't know necessarily that you were talking about the private self versus the
Oh,
public
yes,
self, right?
yeah.
And you didn't know which way was the right way. Do you think it's possible that it's the right way in one place and the wrong way in another place?
Well, I like to write novels that leave the reader to think about the problems I am thinking about. So I have just given you a situation. I have given you a story with characters in a setting. And I'm working through them myself. I know there are some writers who know the end of their story. I am not one of them. So I am just struggling myself trying to figure it out. You take the baton now and you figure it out. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if my sisters are right when they kick me under the table and tell me I'm spilling my guts. I don't know if Oprah Winfrey is right when people come and they say all of that. You have to decide. I know what I think, but I'm leaving it up to the reader to decide which one. I mean, in that story, my mother and my father kept their privacy about that cancer from all of us. We are one of 11, and we are a tight family. And they kept that secret. When my mother finally admitted she had it, my father says casually to me, "Oh, your mother sometimes sleeps in my undershirt and sometimes it's stained with blood." He knew. So I get really angry now. So you knew that. You knew to the extent and you didn't take it. It's not something for me to understand. But look at how it worked out.
We all have stories like this. So many secrets, so many private moments. The next film is about Prospero's daughter, so
Yeah.
let's get to that one.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Prospero's daughter did hit a nerve, and it is, as you say, taught in a lot of colleges. I was very surprised when I got that invitation from the University of Siena. Of course, I had to bring along my sisters with me, and they were doing doctoral dissertations on Prospero's daughter. But I'll say something, and this is why perhaps writers like me need people like you from the Brooklyn Caribbean Literary Festival. I think you had earlier asked me about if my novels have anything to do with me personally. And the answer is yes, for sure, in that novel, because I was educated in one of the top secondary schools. I would say the top secondary school at the time in Trinidad. And my teachers were all British or Europeans. And we were studying The Tempest, and they took the position of Prospero. And I'm sitting in my class, in the back of my class, a little dark-skinned black little girl, and hearing them talk about, there was one thing to castigate Caliban. There was another thing to say that his vile race was such that stripes may move, not kindness. Now, to understand that, you're saying that there's something inherent about being a black person, that it's your race, and it's a vile race, that stripes may move, and you know what stripes are, cat o' nine tails, that you would beat somebody with. That's the thing that would get you to move, to do good, not kindness. Don't try to be kind. And this was the practice. And it just hit me to the core. And and having them still see Prospero as being right. How could you be right if you did that? This, and then, of course, I loved Caliban's defiance. This island's mine, where I was my own king until you brought yourself here. It was mine. So the fact is that all through graduate school, whenever I was taught the Tempest, my professors at NYU still took the position of Prospero, couldn't see Caliban's point of view. And of course, we know people have done that. We have, in the different islands, we have the Martinica and Aimé Césaire, who wrote La Tempête. We have the Cuban, Retamar, who wrote Caliban. I happened to have met him. I was in Cuba and I met him, and he was so delighted. He read the book and he was really happy about it. We have George Lamming, who wrote Water with Berries. I couldn't see any women doing it. So I thought about writing a novel from the point of view of Caliban, because fiction is told from a certain point of view, right? A story is told not just, and that's the point about teaching literature. You have to always teach your students that a story is told from a point of view. So when you're analyzing literature, you have to look at who's telling the story. And you have to decide what are the motives of the person telling the story. So if you read The Tempest and you decide Prospero is telling the story, then that is how you're going to see the story. So I thought about writing Prospero's daughter from a different perspective, from Caliban's perspective. Let Caliban tell the story. Let's hear what he has to say. And, you know, I was very happy about that novel.
You're such a badass for this novel. I really love that. This idea of taking a story that's 400 years old and deciding to give us a different perspective, right? And what were you thinking?
Well, I was thinking that no woman had done that. No female writer had done that. And that the people who had done that, who had gotten a lot of praises, and let me tell you, the Academy tried to act like I didn't exist. Because, of course, they knew George Lamin, Aimé Césaire, Retamar, they knew all these male who had got up and, you know, because they like what Caliban says. You taught me language, and my profit on it is I know how to curse. This is my island, which you took away from me. They like that kind of thing. But a woman deciding to write that. So, my reviewer, I got a really nice review in the Times on that, was a woman. And that's basically what she said, that here was a woman writer taking on this subject and writing about that. And there's a woman in that, a girl in that story. There's Miranda. So I was also imagining. She had been on that island for 12 years. What happened to her? Did she just sit on a rock on the island, you know? What happened to her? So, yeah, I think I liked writing that novel. I liked writing that novel.
You know, that book is about colonialism.
Very much so.
It's about this Prospero, he's nicknamed Prospero, comes and he uses his white magic, his science, to change the landscape of this particular island, change the inhabitants are all changed when he arrives.
But that's what happens. That's how colonialism works. It doesn't only tell you what to read, it tells you what to eat. So as you become more upper class, you're eating English food. Suddenly you're eating au gratin. You can't just eat, you can't just have your potatoes or whatever it is. You gotta make it. So it changes you in that way, because one more time, it's a little island. We have to do the work.
And you feel, when you're reading this book, you feel your indignation. You can feel that you are angry. I mean, before I even saw this film, I felt that on the pages. I felt this sense of that you needed to get it right, that you needed to set the record straight. I was lucky enough to be at Breadloaf last year where you gave a lecture. It was about your love of Jane Austen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a fantastic lecture. It's public, so you could look it up if you wanted to. And you're really grappling in that lecture with Jane Austen generally, and the silences around the slave trade, but particularly Mansfield Park. And you talk about these people having these incredible mansions and palaces, but no one's actually talking about how they accumulated this kind of wealth. And when I think about your love of Shakespeare, and I think about our love of Shakespeare, and I think about our love of, old British novels, which if you grew up in the Caribbean, you've read these books, you love these books, many of them. And our parents love these books, and they gave them to us. My very, very early memories are reading these English British novels. How do we, as people of color, from these places that we know were abused and then silenced in these pages, how do we grapple with still being able to love these books?
Well, I think art is art. And I don't think good art belongs to any particular ethnic group. It's good or it's not good. But I write back to the classics. So I am looking at the classics that I had to swallow, and I write back to them and look for the spaces. Now, I love Jane Austen. Good confession. I was reading Pride and Prejudice for the 10th time this morning. I have 2 more chapters to read. I know the whole story. What I do know now is that while we praise her as a feminist icon, she was writing those novels when there were crimes against humanity that she obviously had to know. She obviously had to know. You just put the dates right next to it. And you look at novels like Persuasion, which is done on the water. Those ships are carrying African bodies. So I am writing back. I like writing back to these people. And the word is sugar. Sugar built all those mansions. Sugar built all those mansions. So I am reading Jane Austen, and nobody tells me in those novels how those people got those mansions and how they got all this wonderful, and I know it's sugar, they got it from sugar. So I like writing about that, and so I guess I read it, I enjoy the novels, but I am seeing the holes, and I think Jane Austen was aware of those holes. And I can find them. I know the novels well enough that I can actually see where those holes are, that she's aware of it. But she has an audience. So she's being careful with that audience. But she knows. So let's get back to Prospero's daughter. At the end of that novel, I love making this quote, by the way. I hope I remember to say it. My Caliban ends up marrying the equivalent of Miranda, right? So at one point, the Miranda character says to Caliban, how can our marriage really work based on what has happened? And he says, because I have my own house, because I got back what was mine. That word is called reparations. And things don't heal until that word comes back. And I want to tell you where I got it from. I got it from another Shakespeare play, Hamlet. So if you will indulge me for 2 minutes, I can tell you that when Claudius, who has killed Hamlet's father, is sitting down praying and asking God to forgive him for killing his brother and being the king, he says, "But how can I be forgiven?" He says, "I don't want to give up the kingdom. I don't want to give up the queen. I don't want to give up the money I have." Just because I'm right here, I don't know the exact quote. But if you read that prayer, how can, anybody knows it? How can, it's very specific. He says, how can you get forgiveness without paying back? Is it possible to get forgiveness without paying back? And he knows what the answer is because he goes to hell. At the end of it, his heels go up to heaven, so you know where he's going. And he says the reason he can't do it is he doesn't want to give up his kingdom. He doesn't want to give up his queen. So just figure, 400 years ago, it was very clear how you get pardon. How one may be pardoned and keep the offense. Can one be pardoned and keep the offense? That is the line. May one be pardoned and keep the offense. And Shakespeare gives us the answer in Hamlet. So I like to weave that into my novels and to show it's not extraordinary when somebody says, "I want reparations." It's not extraordinary when you read Jane Austen and you see the effects of it. So I'm telling the story, but I like to put that in there.
All right. We're going to move on to not for everyday use,
Which is the end. That'll be the end. I have to say I look like my mother in all these pictures. My God, I'm just seeing my mother.
For everyday use is my only memoir. And I think it's unlikely that I would write another memoir. I'm a fiction writer, and this was like a detour. And an interesting detour because, I had been very much on the shortlist for the Hurston Wright, but that novel won the Hurston Wright Legacy Award. I won't say I have given up, but I just feel exhausted. And that was what happened with that memoir. I've been writing so long, I've been getting what I think good reviews, but I wasn't getting the attention. And I had to make a decision, do I write? And I know too many writers who have stopped writing. I know many, many writers that I have started with who are so frustrated by this lack of attention that said, what the heck am I? Because it's not easy to write. It's not. It's like climbing Mount Everest. You write a novel, it's like climbing Mount Everest. I could only have written that memoir after my mother died. And if you know my novels in a sort of a hidden way, there's always some kind of tension between the mother and the daughter. And fiction allows you to pretend, to create an imaginary space, an illusory space, where you can tell truth, but nobody can pinpoint it. Oh, this is Elizabeth, this is her mother. And so my mother died, and I wanted to face this feeling that I had of not being loved or not being given the attention that I thought I should have had. I was a dutiful daughter. My mother would, if she were alive, she would tell you that. She would say that of all her daughters, I gave her no trouble, which was true. I was always concerned about her and her well-being. Whatever resentments or feelings I felt, I hid them. And I just was, that's the best description, a dutiful daughter. So in this memoir, I wanted to investigate, did she ever love me? I have heard her compliment me in my life, telling me how much she was proud of me, etc. But it always had to do with my achievements. And achievements are nothing. The big thing is love, right? So it didn't matter. So I wanted to investigate. And so here is the title, Not for Everyday Use. And I would just tell you, I don't think this loses anything. It is that you go in a Caribbean home like my mother's and you see these beautiful china and these different things on the wine glasses and the crystals. Everything is in display. It's not for everyday use, right? So I came to the conclusion at the end of that memoir that my mother's objectives were what I have become. That my mother's objectives were for me to find out about myself, to achieve either. The only way she could do that is to put it like the way the china was. Don't use it, not for everyday use. So that's why I wrote that memoir, and why I won't write another memoir again.
This is tough. I'm getting a headache.
This book was tough. I don't know about you, but I'm sure you cried. I cried reading it. It's a very, very hard book. And you're really vulnerable in it, which I really admire, but
That was the word.
yeah, because you're doing this exploration of this love between yourself and your sisters and your mother and your parents, but there's also this almost this tension because there's this deep and abiding love between your parents, and you can see them looking toward each other almost all the time. And
That is true.
and if you are a child in that home, you're saying, hey, what about me? But they are so very focused, and yet you have great admiration for the love that they have for each other. So there's this tension that's built into all these, relationships in this home, and there's a lot of children, which automatically means that not everybody's getting a lot of attention, right? So, I remember my first book, Till the Well Runs Dry, I wrote also because I was trying to figure out if my grandmother, like how she expressed love. Did she love me? Did she really do this? And I based a whole character on this very similar person, this person who was kind of closed, And, in your Anna in Between, you have this character who is the maid in the house, and she's also very closed, not very open and emotional, just like your mother. And there's a way that you talk about sort of modeling yourselves or modeling themselves after the English, but then for Petra, she's not necessarily modeling herself after the English. And I wonder if you think that the effects of colonialism and also slavery has a lot to do with sort of this closed feeling that we get sometimes, this unwillingness to be vulnerable.
Well, I tell you, in writing that memoir, I understood how much we need love. We may think we need food to live, and we may think we need something to drink to live, but more than anything else, we need love. And I had a hard time with the Catholic Church on that because my mother had 14 pregnancies, right up and about 4 or 5 miscarriages on top of that. We are 11 in all. Why? Every time she slept with her husband. Birth control was against the church. And she was mortally afraid of going to hell. But there's something you said that was extraordinary for me with my parents. They adored each other. And I don't mean they loved each other in this kind of, yummy, yummy kind of way. They were passionate. Right up to the point where my mother died at 90 and my father died at 94, where he wanted to take her place. I can tell you that when my mother eventually had the mastectomy and came up in her room, and all of us are around the table or on her bed, her children, my father goes right up to her and he's talking to her as though we are not in the room. And he says to her, Una, as soon as you get out of this thing, we are going to have our showers together from now on. I mean, good God, send me a man like that. I mean, he cleared up anything about her not having breasts. He made her, and how old was my mother then? She was like almost 80, 82 or something like that. Okay? So I was very jealous of that, I must say. I think all of us were jealous of that because they loved us as their children, but if you picked up that from the memoir, they came first. And I have learned to admire that and think it's a good idea because children leave the nest. So when we left the nest, they had each other. So I think that was a good thing. However, we were casualties.
And this is the last thing I'm going to say, but
We were casualties.
well, and what you did with that is you decided to do something different. I see the relationship you have with Jason, your son.
Yes, I reversed it.
And your grandchildren.
I reversed it.
You made a conscious decision to do something.
I reversed it.
And that should be praised.
I reversed it. That is absolutely true. I think my son is somewhere here. But from the time he was little, he was on my desk when I was teaching in his car chair, on my desk. Everybody at the college knew him. When I went everywhere, shopping, to the store, he was on my hip, right next to me. And he would play all kinds of stupid games and disappear. And I would get frantic and think the world ended. But I was reversing it.
Yeah, my mother did that too.
Yeah, because I felt that, number one, a child needs love. And if you don't get it when you're a child, you're going to want it when you're old as I am. You're going to still want it. And then, of course, the problem with women is that we go looking for love in all the wrong direction.
All right, we're going to wrap up here. Elizabeth, you are a treasure.
Well, thank you, Lorraine.
And, a wonderful
This is
writer.
so nice.
And no, it's beautiful. And a wonderful teacher. And I hope you all really enjoyed this. And I hope you grab at least one of her many, many books. They're all wonderful, and as you can tell, in different ways. Your work was forever in our canon. So thank you.
You're most welcome.